Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. We would like to ask everyone to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the program. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the program, and we will only be accepting questions and comments via the chat window. At the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or possibly the top right if you are on a different device, you should be able to see an option for chat. If you click that, it will open the chat window where you can type your questions so that they may be read aloud and answered. Thank you, and enjoy the event.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event today. My name is Stephanie Chaikin. I'm the director of the Center for the Events at NJCU, and I'd like to welcome you to a conversation with scholar and writer Nancy Caronia, led by our favorite leader, Dr. Edwidge Junta. Edwidge has been bringing us these super insightful conversations that delve into what inspires writers to create their work, and today is no exception. Eddie is an award-winning educator, super well-loved, as well as an acclaimed writer and editor. Among others, her books include Teaching Italian-American Literature, Film, and Popular Culture, and Personal Effects, Essays on Memoir, Teaching, and Culture in the Work of Louise DeSalvo. Eddie was awarded the OSIA Book Club Selection for Italian-American Writers on New Jersey and the Educator of the Year Award for the Higher Education category from the Association of Italian-American Educators, among many others. So Eddie, please start us off today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This collaboration with the NJCU Center for the Arts is such a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to bringing more events and working together so that we can continue to build and expand our creative and intellectual community. I'm especially happy to introduce the author who is with us today, Nancy Caronia, whom I've known for many, many years, and whose work I deeply respect. Nancy Caronia is Associate Professor in the Department of English at West Virginia University. She received the Pushcart Prize-nominated, and her work in creative nonfiction, as well as scholarly essays, have been published in many journals and anthologies, including the Milk of Almonds, Italian-American Women Writers on Food and Culture, a book that I co-edited with Louise DeSalvo, and another important anthology, Don't Tell Mama, the Penguin Book of Italian-American Writings. You also will find their work in many, many publications and many literary magazines like Ovunque Siamo, the New Delta Review, and Bio Stories. I want to talk about also the work that I did with her, collaborating for several years on a project. Both of us share a great devotion to the work of Louise DeSalvo, and she wrote the introduction for the reprint of Louise DeSalvo's novel, Casting Off, a novel that when it was first written, no American publisher would publish it, so it was originally published in England and then was reprinted in the United States, and her introduction is fantastic. All her work is really striking, and now she is tackling a new subject, a subject really, I don't know if anybody else who has written about this, and it's a book project on American dime novels and their discriminatory characterization of Italian immigrants and Italian Americans at the turn of the 20th century. The project is called Dime Novels, Racialization and Erasure. And she's also working on a memoir that focuses on issues of dementia and aging. I saved one of a project last because I've had the pleasure of working with Nancy on this project. And my students, my creative writing students who hear me often talk about the importance of writing partnerships, of identifying the writers who will be your friends and collaborators for a long, long time. Well, I'm talking of people like Nancy Caronia. We're currently writing partners, but we also worked for a number of years on a project that was the first book entirely devoted to an Italian-American woman writer. The writer was Luis de Salvo. And the book was especially meaningful to us because it wasn't just a traditional scholarly book, but it was a collection of essays that included scholarly essays, personal essays, and those essays that I call with my students hybrid essays, essays that combine the scholarly and the critical, and many of them are about to start that kind of project. It was truly inspirational to be able to work with her, and we are very proud of that project, which has also come out in paperback. So I asked Nancy to join us today because I think of her as the creative, intellectual person who can bring together so many different threads of work. And whether she's writing creative nonfiction memoir or she's writing critical writing, the reverberations are really so powerful. So the way in which the event is going to run, I have a number of questions. I promise I'm not going to ask all of them because I want to leave a time to everyone to ask questions, but we'll also have the opportunity to hear Nancy read a little bit from her work. So as a reminder, please start posting your questions. Our wonderful Emily Sierra, who's a graduate of NJCU and a recent winner of the Kathy Potter Memorial Writing Award, is with us. She will be looking through your questions and she will select the questions that may be more suitable because of broader interest. So Nancy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here. This is such an honor. And I'm so excited to talk about not only my work, but our collaborative work and how it really reverberates for our students.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, for finding the time to be with us. You know, this semester I'm teaching your work in all of my classes. So my women in literature students are reading one of your pieces, and my memoir students are reading one of your pieces. And my students, and those are, I think, are more obvious choices. Of course, you have, you actually came and visited my very first memoir class in 1997. It wasn't even called memoir; it was a women writers workshop. I still remember that class. So memoir and women in literature, I think they are more obvious choices, but also included your work, and especially your pieces Go to Hell and 8 in my course of Dark Stories for Young Adult. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit about what young adult literature is to you. And there is, of course, a debate because we know that as of now, young adult literature has its own marketing niche, and there are some writers who describe themselves and they're seen as exclusively young adult authors. But of course, there are so many literary texts that may not be described as young adult literature, and still they make perfectable, suitable readings. So could you talk a little bit about what young adult literature is for you?
Sure. You've asked, I think, a complicated question. When I think about young adult literature today, as compared to young adult literature 20 years ago, I want to go right away to what chick lit originally was. Chick lit was the term was created by actually an Italian-American writer, Chris Mazza, and it really was about feminist literature on the edge, avant-garde, not afraid to speak the truth, not afraid to talk about difficult subjects. And then chick lit evolved to be anything with a feel-good rom-com with women as the central characters. I think young adult literature has evolved, maybe not in quite as a dramatic way as chick lit, but young adult literature really is a formula that says young people are at the center of the equation. They need to go on a quest. They need to solve their own problems. So adults might be around to offer advice, but they're not intervening in the problem. They need to step aside and let the children find their own way. And it's super important in young adult literature that the characters are the ages of the children that are reading the books. So you don't want to have a young adult novel about an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old is running the ship. When I write children, though, I'm not necessarily writing for the children because the perspective that I'm offering is often messy. Young adult literature isn't messy.
We're frozen a minute, but we'll get you back. Eddie, do you want to read something from one of the pieces?
Yes, so while we try to get, oh, there she is, she's back.
Oh, did I go away?
We're
Yeah,
frozen a minute.
Where did I stop?
You were talking
Messy.
about young adult.
Young adult literature is not messy. And
Like, yeah, oh, good. I didn't go away for very long. So young adult literature is not messy. It's like we have the conflict at the beginning. Either it's the kid in the cupboard or the young woman who has to offer herself as tribute to protect her sister. And then there's a conflict. There's another conflict they overcome. There's another obstacle they overcome. And by the end of it, we have some sense of a solution and a moving forward. They have come through their quest. They are the hero or heroine of their story. When I'm writing, I'm not thinking about myself or my character, if they're a young person, as the hero or the heroine. I'm not looking to create this linear story that maybe young adults will read, because young adults need those stories. They need those hopeful stories that say, you can work through your obstacles. You can work through conflict. But I'm not necessarily writing for young adults. I'm writing for adults who need that perspective, once again, of what children go through. Does that help a little bit to talk about it in this way?
Absolutely. And actually, what you remind me of is Margot Fragoso's memoir, Tiger, Tiger.
Yes.
Where she actually, in that, Margot Fragoso, for those of you who are not familiar with her, she was a graduate of NJCU, and she wrote this memoir, which ended up becoming an international bestseller. And in that memoir, she removed the reflective component because she wanted to really show the raw experience of the children. But you're absolutely right. She wasn't writing for children or young adult or very young adult, but she was writing for a slightly older, an older audience. You know, just to hear you speak, it just made me think, reminded me of the first time I heard you read, and it was such a memorable, powerful experience. So I'm wondering whether you could read a little bit from any of your pieces.
So I'll read a short snippet from an original version of Go to Hell, because I think this is an interesting perspective. When I first wrote this, I didn't understand that I was coming from a point of view of Persephone, and Vijay sort of pointed that out to me. But this is, and we can talk about this later in the Q&A, this is memoir. But it was very early in my writing career, and I changed everyone's names. So it's a tale of my grandfather and my father, and the way my grandfather treated my father and treated his children and his grandchildren. So I'm going to just give a little snippet here from one time in Woodside, Queens, when I was in the backyard playing with my cousins at my grandparents' house. When I was about 7 years old, my cousin Maddie burned herself on my grandparents' barbecue grill at a backyard party they had at their house in Woodside, Queens, late 60s suburbia. Some of us were playing tag, and she ran right into the hot grill that Grandpa had placed in the middle of the driveway after he cooked all the sausages on it in the backyard. The kids had been playing in the driveway the entire day, but he'd insisted on placing the hot grill in the middle of our playing field, even after our fathers, his sons, told him it wasn't a good idea. "What the hell do you know anyway?" he shouted at them. "Leave me alone and let me do what I want. It's my house," he proclaimed. His sons shrugged their shoulders, walked to the small backyard, and opened up fresh bottles of Rheingold beer. Grandpa laughed when Maddie ran into the grill. She was running backwards away from our other crazy but cute cousin, Joseph, who was it in our game of tag. Grandpa cornered Maddie between the grill and the house, teasing her. "Serves you right for playing rough. You want to play rough, you're gonna get burned." And he laughed louder as he pushed against her arm where the second-degree burn was beginning to blister. All the cousins were yelling at him to stop, but Maddie was defiantly silent, not shedding even one tear as he taunted her. Finally, Aunt Helen, her mother, came running from the kitchen where all the women were washing the dishes and pulled Maddie away from him. "Leave her alone, Pops. Geez, she's only a little girl." Grandpa reached out for my aunt and said, "Don't talk to me that way. I'm not your husband. I'll smack ya." And he picked up a nearby broom and tried to swat her with it, while his sons drank their Rheingolds and watched quietly from the backyard. That's a very short snippet of life in a Sicilian American immigrant home where the patriarch wants things to be a certain way and the rest of the family has various degrees of rebellion or silence. It's always interesting to me when I think about this piece, how silent my father and his brothers were. They were terrified of their father, even as adults. They didn't want to go against him. And in rereading this in preparation for today, seeing them in the background as the sister-in-law, right? My aunt comes out and defends is a really important moment, that it's the women that step up while the men step back, which is a very different sort of idea of what Italian-American masculinity is.
Absolutely. That was so powerful. And thank you for pointing out the very complex dynamics that define adult masculinity, because the male characters, very often the sons are infantilized. And you know, there is a whole other father-son mythology at play in your work that we could discuss for hours. And girls are really, really powerful figures in your stories. They are fierce, they are defiant, they are tough. It's not that they are not afraid, but they're also fearless. And you've always been interested in girl voices. In the mid-1990s, you created a whole series called Girl Speak in New York City at the Knitting Factory, and the writers who were featured were ranged in age. With the youngest was my own daughter, was 8 years old at the time. You also published an anthology that featured that included writers from the series.
So,
and go ahead. Yes.
So I think that this is really important that you're bringing this up, because when I did Girl Speak with my friend Melissa Smith, who still lives in New York City, we were going to readings, and every reading that we went to only had men getting up and talking and being just sexist, the things that they would say about women. And there was one time when we were at MoMA at a reading, and we turned to each other and we just both at the same time said, "I can't take this anymore. Can we please do our own reading series?" And that's how Girl Speak was born, because we thought we want to hear girls' voices. And we did that series for 2 years. And then I created that one anthology out of it. And it was important to me that we did not only have women in their prime or well-known writers. And that was the reason why we asked Emily and Sophia, who were 8, to read. And then we had people who were of retirement age. It was such a diverse group. And I want to encourage all of you, even in this Zoom atmosphere, if you feel this need to have voices be heard, create your own magic, because it really was magic. And it helped Melissa and I contextualize why we felt left out. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say that.
You just summarized the question and the answer much more eloquently. We are both strong believers in the importance of these public spaces. So for you, you have looked for spaces for your voice to be heard, but always also be so concerned with creating spaces for other writers. How does that nurture you? Oh, does it?
No, I feel like my reason to be is to be in community and collaboration. I don't think what happened between the two of us was an accident when we started working on Louise's books, although the first step of it maybe was accidental, but I don't think it was an accident. Just like my connection with Melissa in the late 90s wasn't an accident. And today, as a professor at West Virginia University, the students here are very different than the students that I taught when I taught at New Jersey City University or University of Rhode Island. But what I see again and again and again is this need to connect, this need to make sure that voices are heard and honored. So for me, what I want to do always is give people the space to create. I want to give them the space to be who they are. And so I always, even when I'm teaching literature classes or composition classes, there's always a creative writing component because that teaches people how to develop their voices. It can be simple, but I want them to develop their own voices, not have somebody else's voice coming through them because they've been put in this box. And that can be hard. I think we all have these multiple identities, and then we wind up hiding some of those identities. So right now, for instance, in West Virginia, I have a working group with folks from University of Pittsburgh, Fairmont State in West Virginia University, the Heinz History Center. We're trying to map the Italian-American text and cultural markers of Italian Americans in that area. But again, I was told I could do it alone with the West Virginia archives. And I went, I don't want to do this by myself. I want to do this with other people because these archives are bigger than me and I don't have the expertise for it. So we're finally starting to do that. I think it's important to be in community for everything.
Wow, thank you. And I think these words really resonate for so many people in our audience. Just be patient. I'm going to ask Nancy one more question, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So I wanted to ask you a related question to this idea of the girl and the girl's voice. And how do you prepare as a writer to evoke a girl on the page and make her so present? And I was wondering whether you could talk about all preparatory work, not just the technical work in terms of research or whatever writing, but also if there is any rituals, any kind of preparation that you do, especially when you write, as you often do, about trauma. And maybe you can even think the question is getting bigger and bigger by the minute. But if you could also offer some suggestions, or if not suggestions, some ideas on how you deal as a writer, and that's also as a reader with grappling with trauma on the page, especially when experienced by a child, and in your case, a girl.
Eddie's right. I write a lot about trauma and a lot about difficult subjects. And so one of the things that I've had to do is take care of myself, because I think that writing about sexual abuse, writing about domestic violence, writing about bullying, any of these things, we need to care for ourselves because we want the information out there. I don't want there to be secrets. And so I have 3 things right now that I'm doing, even with COVID, right? I do yoga badly. I'll say I'm not a yogi. I do yoga badly, but I also have been practicing Tai Chi for over 30 years. And so yoga and Tai Chi always bring me back into my body. So that way I don't go away as I write. I have one piece, it would take me time to find it, that I wrote that was a dream piece, but it wasn't a dream piece. It was something that had happened to me that was it was sexual abuse. And in order to write that piece, I was writing about leaving my body, but I couldn't have written it if I wasn't in my body. I had to stay there. So I did Tai Chi. I also do things like walk a lot. I take walks here. I live in West Virginia, so I walk in the woods. And I think that we need to do those kinds of things to take care of ourselves. If we don't, if we abandon our bodies, we then abandon, the next thing that gets abandoned is our mental state. And then the next thing that gets abandoned is our emotional state. And then the next thing that gets abandoned is our spiritual state. And all of those things are important to being able to write. Ambition and drive will only get you so far. It might get you one book, but then what do you do? How do you sustain that connection? And so I remember when I wrote, I pulled out 8. This is the original piece that appeared in this very early New Jersey City University journal. And that's me at 8 years old with a box of nothing. And I remember when I wrote this, I was practicing Tai Chi at the time. And when I would do Tai Chi, I couldn't quiet my mind because this rhyme was running through my head and running through my head and running through my head. And so I was working at that time doing free writes with friends. We would get together. We were working out of Wild Mind, Natalie Goldberg's book, Wild Mind. We get together and I literally sat down with my friends and they gave a prompt and I ignored the prompt and I started this was flooding out of me. So I had safe space because I was with other people, but I was also doing my daily practice of Tai Chi and walking. And so when this flooded out of me, it was surprising. I wrote it again, and then I went back and I tweaked it. This piece still surprises me because I did not revise it, which I do a lot with a lot of my other work, but this piece flooded out of me. And I think of myself in that moment like a football player who's in the zone. I was in the zone. But here's the thing, you can't count on always being in the zone. So what you have to do is you have to prepare by doing the things that are important to you, taking care of yourself as you start to think about trauma, and then understand that you're going to go back and you're going to spend time in that world. I remember Toni Morrison, after she wrote Beloved, somebody asked her, do you miss being with those characters? And she went, nope, I put them out of my house when I was done. Because it was a lot of trauma that she was writing about. It was a lot. It was a burden on her spiritually and emotionally. And when she was done, she said, I am done. They are gone. And I think that that's important for all of us, that when we're writing about personal trauma, she was writing about ancestral trauma, right? Which is, it's in her DNA. In some ways, she couldn't let go of it even when she let the characters out of the house. And that's the same for us. So we always have to go back to, how do I take care of myself? What are the things that are important to me? For you, it may be you finish something, you got to go make rice pudding, you know? You may need to have a cup of coffee. You know? Whatever it is, you need to make sure that it's part of your habit, your daily habit. That was long, sorry.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know all my students will be working, or at least most of them, on some kind of creative project. And we're reading women in literature. There is trauma pretty much in every text. So
it's not funny, I'm sorry.
well, we know if we're that's a story. I mean, there is a lot of trauma in women's stories, and as you are so eloquently putting it, we need to get those stories out. When those stories out, they're out, then they get read. And sometimes we get inspired as readers. Sometimes we get inspired as readers and writers. Now, since you mentioned 8, would you just read a snippet and then we open it up to questions? Emily, you can start getting a couple of questions ready.
Okay, so I'm going to start right from the beginning and go through the first section. So, When I am 8, oh, 8 is so great. Now that I'm 8, I'm no longer a girl. I'm grown up, a grown up at 8, that great 8. And for my birthday, I get boxes and boxes wrapped in flowered paper from the card store, cards that tell me I am grade 8. I am so cute in my short pixie hair and my blue plastic jewelry and my yellow dress with the orange trim. I am great at 8 and open the present from Auntie Ida, mommy's sister, my favorite aunt. She is the mother of my favorite cousin, Patricia Ann, who will be a nun someday. She has the calling, even though she is the only child. She is it, and Auntie Ida will not have grandchildren because her daughter will marry God. We will have a red phone to God when she marries him, like the commissioner has with Batman. Only it's not TV. Holy moly, Jesus, it's real life. The box, my present from Auntie Ida, wrapped with number 8 wrapping paper, purple paper ribbon, and a big purple bow. I tear it carefully. I save the wrapping paper. I don't want anyone to think I waste their money. Even on my birthday, this birthday, I am 8. I am great. I am 8. It is today in August, hot outside, not so hot in. Fans blowing from kitchen to living room, bedroom to living room. 20 people crowded into the 5-room railroad flat where we live in Queens, and they're all there to celebrate me. It's a blue learner's box under the paper, but Auntie Ida, leaning forward, smoking a cigarette, says in her gravelly voice, "Ignore the box. Always ignore the box. Nothing is ever where it says it's from. You know that, right, Nancy? You're a big girl now." She is smiling between puffs, smiling between sips, smiling between blackened teeth, the only ones left in her mouth. I'm not dumb. It can't be from learners. I want a Barbie. She asked what I want. I told Auntie Ida. She always listens to me. Barbie, 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 I can't wait. My sisters, my brother, my cousins sit around me in a circle. I'm the chief today, and they are my Indians. I look at them and smile before I crack the box open and peek. My smile disappears. Nothing is there. I open the blue learner's box all the way open, but there's no Barbie. There's nothing inside. It's a box of nothing. My father growls, "Hey, girlie, looky here." He captures my face forever, a Kodak moment. At 8, a Kodak moment forever. 8 is not so great. I am 8, a box of nothing from my present. Mommy's skinny body is in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, smoking a cigarette, leaning on the wall. "Ida," she says, raising her eyebrows behind her black cat eyeglasses with the rhinestones round the rim, smirk on her face. "Give her that present before she cries. I don't want to have to put up with her later after you're all gone. It's too late. My eyes are hate. Hate at 8, not so great, not so great. I feel hate at 8, I am hate at grade 8. I look at my aunt, my favorite aunt. I hate my favorite aunt. My brother, my sisters, my cousins do not look. No one meets my eye. They steal glances at each other. I'm bad. They all know I'm a bad girl. I hate at 8. Never a big girl, never a grown up. I hate at 8. Hate, hate, hate. 8 is not so great.
Wow. Spectacular.
Thank you.
That is one of my favorite pieces, not just written by you, but just if I had to single out memoir writing that really captures the experience, the voice of the girl, well, that wins. Thank you so much, Nancy. So we're going to open it up to questions. Emily, you have been reading through the questions. I've been glancing at them. So your turn now.
Okay. And I just have to say, I am literally covered in chills. This entire time, this has been feeding me so much. It was so beautiful. And the chat has also been really great the entire time. And I do have a few questions. So the first question I have is from Holly Hensley. She writes, especially with trauma, how do you decide when it is the right time to begin writing about it? Do you feel that a certain amount of time needs to pass to be able to separate yourself as the character and yourself as you write or as the writer?
Thank you, Emily, for doing this. And thank you, Holly, for this important question. Here's the thing. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to write through the trauma. And this is what I would say about that. You can separate writing about the trauma, and then writing to publish this important story about trauma. And so you may start an initial pass on something and get it down just because it's therapeutic in some way. Louise DeSalvo talks about this in writing as a way of healing, that you're allowed to write it and then walk away and then come back to it later on. And so one of the most important things to me is that if I want to write about it, I'm going to write about it, but I'm going to promise myself that it doesn't have to be public, that I can take that piece and move it to the side for now and focus on things around it. So while I may be talking about, say, sexual abuse that happens when I'm out with friends and I'm in the car, I may need to spit all that out, but I also may go back and say, what can I do right now? All right, I'm going to write about the event leading up to what happened. I'm going to write about where we went out and the restaurant. I'm going to focus on those details of drinking a Long Island iced tea rather than focusing on the trauma, and separate the two out until I'm ready to walk to the event itself. And then I might take things that I wrote in some free writes and move them into the story part of the piece. But we have to understand that we are under no obligation to publish any of it until we're ready to do that. And I would say that I think you're really lucky with Edvijay that she's a good teacher and facilitator that understands that. So if you write something in your class, it's a safe space. I would say not all classes are safe spaces, and you need to honor that in yourself. And because otherwise you're setting yourself up to be abused all over again. I hope that makes sense.
That's super powerful and very much resonates. I'm sure it definitely does. It's almost like you're reading my mind, because the next question from Vanessa Biza almost follows the same sort of logic, where she's asking, while writing about your experiences, do you ever feel like you didn't write enough about it? Or did you feel that you wrote too much about it and you had to almost limit yourself from those experiences that you would like to share with your audience? So kind of like how you were talking about before, there's a difference between writing for yourself and then writing to be published.
Yeah. So the person who asked the question was Vanessa?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Vanessa, for this question. You know, it's funny because I went through a period where I wrote a lot of very personal things, and then I published them piecemeal. But the truth is I have a book, and I haven't been ready until now to start to think about putting it all together in a book. That's 20 years. That's a long time. And what I've learned is it takes as long as it takes. And in some ways, I may be more ready now because all of my grandparents are gone. My parents, it just is a year ago. Today would have been their 60th wedding anniversary, and they're gone. And I also think I have a different perspective about what happened even with them that I'm glad to have, that I can now weave that through these stories. Because when I was younger, I could only see them not protecting me. And I have a slightly different sense of everything that happened growing up now. And I'm glad that I can now start to weave some of that into what I'm doing. But it takes as long as it takes. And are there times when I feel like I share things with the wrong people? Absolutely. And I can't give you a formula how not to do that. It's trial and error. And I would say you have to trust people incrementally. You can't give everybody your whole heart the minute you see them, even though I always want to. And I make the same mistake over and over again, because as I said early in this talk, I believe in community, I believe in collaboration, but not everybody else believes in it. They say they do, but they pay lip service to it. And so sometimes it's trial and error. And that's why we need to have those things that bring us back to our body. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you're a person who lifts weights and that's how you stay in your body. But you got to figure out what that is for you. So when those things happen, you can go back there rather than beating yourself up.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, especially the point of trial and error. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. Thinking that we had a secure community or secure audience and kind of having to learn through that way. So now I'm going to take us a little bit more craft orientated with Peggy's next question, which is specifically on what is your process for creating the characters of living people in the genre of a memoir. So kind of that process of crafting. Your characters really jump off the page. They're very lively. So this is very interesting.
So what's important to me, I work a lot from photographs. And when my mom and dad were getting older, I would go home and I would sit down with them and say, hey, can we look through this book? Can we look through this photo album? And then I'd be like, can I take these pictures with me? So I was taking pictures home with me for the last 7 years. My siblings don't know this, so if they're watching, uh-oh, I'm going to be revealed right now. But it was important to me because I wanted to have pictures of people at the age they were when I was writing about them. And then I had my experience of who they were today as I was in relationship with them. So for me, I work a lot with pictures. I've also kept journals since I was very young, and I can go back and I can look at my journals and say, oh, this is what happened. I'm thinking it happened this way, but it happened this way. So how am I going to make this real? I also am an observer of people in a way that sometimes I'm having a conversation with someone and I have no idea what they're saying because I'm watching gestures or seeing the way they tilt their head or what's not being said a lot of time. And then I can transfer what's happening with a colleague into a character that I'm writing about because something they do reminds me of an aunt or an uncle or a cousin or a sibling. And I think that that's important, that part of the work of memoir is writing not fiction, but using fiction techniques to bring the reader in and to let the reader know the experience of this small truth that you're talking about. And so you have to be an observer of people and community all the time. I hope that helps.
No, yeah, I think I and a lot of other people in the chat have also said that that's a really brilliant idea to incorporate like the visual aspects and kind of keeping that dear to yourself as you're writing. Another question from Michael Garcia, and this is relating directly to the last thing that you read, 8, is why did you choose that particular age? Why choose the age 8? And why, as opposed to another age or another sort of moment from your childhood or, yeah, so why that age particularly?
It's really, Michael, that's a really fabulous question. And you may already suspect. So 8 was a turning point in many ways. The go to hell piece of when my grandfather abuses my sister and I, and this piece of the learner's box that I open that's empty, it's the end of childhood. It's the moment when I no longer can trust the adults around me. I had smaller things happen before that at 5, at 3, but 8 was that moment where I had a consciousness about the fact that I was being wronged and that it was in some ways irreparable, that I could no longer open my heart to trust these people. And so I see that, and I will say to you, because I write about my niece in Big Girl Tales, and I see the same thing happened to my niece at 8 years old. I don't know, I have to do more reading on it because I think it's a cognitive thing that happens with 8-year-olds' brains. But there's that sense of, oh, I can't trust you anymore. Or the baggage of your parents starts to show up and your favorite aunt can no longer be your favorite aunt because your mom or your dad has a certain feeling about your favorite aunt. And so now you got to cover. When you were 6, you didn't know you had to cover or you didn't care, right? Because the world was still you. But suddenly at 8, the world isn't just you. It's about how do I relate to other people? So thanks for that question. I think it's important, and it might be a different age for other people, but I have a feeling that there's something cognitive that's going on with the brain at 8.
Yeah, especially, I also have a niece who's 6 right now. And so the fact you're even mentioning it, I'm also very aware of like, oh, wait a second. She is starting to realize things a little bit more. That's definitely something to look into more for all of us who are working, especially with memory. Another question from Ramon, Ramon, is someone who has personally lived through family trauma. Does writing help you feel better about yourself and kind of relieve some of the pressure from what you have faced?
Ramon, that's a really beautiful question. I think what it's helped me to do is to feel more myself and to take up my space and have my voice, which is why I think it's so important for my students. And when I talked about Girl Speak, I want other people to have their voice. But the other thing that it has done for me that I did not expect was I was able to be with my parents in a way that I hadn't expected. That I understood that they were, at some point I started to see them not as my parents, but as human beings who had their own suffering, their own life, and their own love. And when they both got ill, because they both got ill, almost my mom before my dad, but then my mom had a stroke and then vascular dementia. And then my dad had lung cancer that spread everywhere. And the thing that was really important to me at the end, because I could have really stayed stuck in whatever had happened when I was a child. But the thing that really stuck with me was that I wanted dignity for them at the end of their lives. That it was super important for me to honor them as human beings who, whatever mistakes they made, they brought me into the world. And if you had asked me at 25 or 30 if I was going to feel that way, I would have laughed in your face, because I wanted nothing more than to get away from them, to get away from my family, to get away from the traditions, to get away from what I saw as crazy kinds of abuse. And I have now, and I think part of the reason why I have a different perspective is from writing so much about it, from looking at the pictures, from starting to see different relationships in photographs that I hadn't seen before, from listening to my family tell the stories, because each of us has our own perspective. And so it's not only helped me be me, but it's helped me to allow them to be them. I'm not trying to fix anybody anymore. I'm done. And if they're abusive, I'm going to stay away. But the truth is, my parents, once I was grown up, they couldn't hurt me anymore. So they just became human beings to me who needed me as much as maybe I needed them. I don't know if that makes sense.
Maria, that's definitely resonating, at least particularly for me. My last memoir was about, again, a complicated relationship with my father. And so you saying how you can be with them in your writing in a completely different way. Again, chills. I get so many chills. I think if we have enough time for one more question, Louisa just posted a really interesting one that I think resonates for a lot of us who are thinking about getting published, particularly with their memoirs, is, do you ever have negative or challenging perspectives to your stories from members of your family? And if so, how do you respond to this? Has this ever changed relationships with close family members?
So my family are not readers, so I've kind of never had to really worry big time about them. My niece is now in college and she wants to be a writer and an editor. So I sent her the piece I wrote about her recently, and she wrote back, "This is good," but that was all she said. Like she's not ready maybe to actually open that box for many reasons, and I appreciate the many reasons, because she has an intellect like mine, and I think an emotional life that's similar to mine, though she's a lot like her mom and her dad, so I want to honor that. But I haven't had that, but I also haven't put together a book, because I knew once I put together a book, then the family wouldn't want to read it, because they would be like, she has a book, we have to read it. But as long as it's been in small chunks, nobody needs to pay attention, because they don't read that stuff. And now I feel like it's not that I don't care anymore, it's that I'm a lot stronger. So what they say isn't going to matter in the same way. I remember reading one piece, Eddie, you would probably remember this. I read this piece called The Dream that I mentioned before, where it's a dream and it's about the abuse. And someone I didn't know came up to me and said, there should be a therapist for us to talk about this afterwards. And I was like, wait, why am I responsible for your response to my work? Like, it scared me, and it backed me off a little bit after that, because I thought, I'm just reading this and this is my work. I'm not responsible for how you receive it. And so now I'm more protective. That moment made me be more protective. I feel like this was a safe space, But I still haven't really read some of the hardest stuff for all of you today, but you're reading it, so you know. Does that make sense, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly too, something that I have to remind myself is that these are our own truths, and therefore, like you're saying, it's not my responsibility how you take in my truth or my story. And so, yeah, that definitely, it makes a lot of sense.
I also I've sat down with I have two sisters, and we've sat down and talked about family events, and we fight about when things happened. And they're like, no, this happened then. I'm like, no, it couldn't have happened then because of this. And sometimes I'm wrong, but more often they're wrong. Though they would not agree with me on that. But our memories, because I'm the oldest, my sister is the middle, and then we have my baby sister whose birthday, and I wrote to her yesterday and said, you'll always be the baby, even though she's much older than a baby. But we all have different perspectives because we met our parents at different points in my parents' life. And so we see things entirely differently. I was new to them. You know, they were still like in newlywed love when they had me. By the time they had my sister, they were exhausted. My mom had 4 kids in 5 years. So my sister didn't get the same experience of them that I had as an infant. And even if I can't consciously remember that, cellularly, I have that experience that they don't have.
Yeah, I think that resonates for a lot of people. Yeah, that we all meet our parents at very different points of our lives. And so, yeah, that's very relatable, that comment too.
Thank you so much, Emily, for just presenting these questions so beautifully, and Nancy for your answers that I think really map out a path for so many of us who are engaged in the process, whether of reading or writing difficult stories in whatever setting, whether it's in the classroom or privately. I know we will be talking in my classes about your responses. But I want to ask you one last question before we bring this to the close. I actually really appreciate that we can get through a whole hour and not think or talk about COVID and the pandemic and the now normalized experience of being together on Zoom. And I have a genuine appreciation for some of the opportunities that actually getting together virtually affords us. But in that context, if we, for a second, we can think about that context, and you are engaged in so many activities. You are a scholar and you're doing this really new work with a lot of archival research. You're also a writer who's writing new material as well as thinking about assembling this book. And you are a teacher during the pandemic, which has forced all of us who are in teaching to reinvent ourselves in ways that are almost unrecognizable. And then there is the isolation, and you are now in West Virginia, you are from the Northeast. There are so many challenges. How do you keep balance and do all the work that you do, including the very important self-care that you described, every day, without feeling just something is falling apart or something is getting lost?
The first thing I'll say is I'm not great at it every day, but because I teach and then I advise, and I have almost 200 advising appointments a semester. So comes out to be 15 or 20 hours a week sometimes. So I'm literally working and on my computer between 70 and 80 hours a week. That's a lot. So I force myself when I get up to go, I have a space where I have my yoga mat and I have some other things. And I force myself to do that first thing in the morning, because if I don't do it first thing in the morning, it falls apart. And so I make a bet, I make a deal with myself, get up and spend even 15 minutes. And I use this great, I don't know if you know her, Yoga with Adrienne. She has a YouTube channel, free. And what's great about it is if I feel super stressed, I'll pick a video that's only 10 or 15 minutes long. And if I feel like I have more time some days, then I'll pick something that's 30 minutes long. But I love her because you can do that. And then I'll do a little Tai Chi. And then at the end of the day, I force myself at some point at the 10-hour mark to stop, and I go out and I take a walk. So I do that. But the other thing that I've had to do, I was fine the first couple of months not seeing people, but I live alone and I'm in West Virginia. So I now make sure that I have a couple of people who also have big bubbles because they have spouses that are immune compromised. So I'll have them come and we'll sit on my front porch and we'll talk. Or I make sure that I have Zoom chats with people that I miss and I love. And so we'll have a Zoom happy hour. But I have to do that. Otherwise, all I'm doing is working, and I am miserable if all I'm doing is working. I need variety, we all do. All of us need, and I know some of you are probably working full time while going to school. And I want to say to each and every one of you, I honor the fact that you need to work, but I also honor the fact that you need to even take 5 minutes a day for just you, whether it's to sit quiet, to stretch, because if you don't do that, your body is like a bank account. There will be interest to pay. So you have to take care. And I hate to say this, but I think that things are going to get rougher. I don't think things are getting easier in the next 3 months. I think things are going to get rougher. And so it's super important that we take care of ourselves for whatever is coming down the road for each and every one of us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I've always appreciated the way in which you can bring it all together. As I said earlier in my introduction, that somehow all these different threads of the wonderful creative person, teacher, scholar, Tai Chi practitioner and teacher. You didn't say that you also teach Tai Chi.
Yes, I do.
Excellent writing partner, good friend. They all come together, and so you really are an example. And thank you for being so generous with your time, for the wonderful readings, and for answering these questions. Emily, thank you so much for taking over the second part of the program. Stephanie and the whole center, thank you so much for hosting this event. And everyone who came from NJCU, and I saw there are several people who are from outside NJCU. Thank you so much. I can see actually a few writers were there. I'm going to ask you if you want to be in the next conversation. This was wonderful. Thank you very much. Stephanie, to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so very much, Nancy and Eddie. That was amazing. Oh my gosh, we are elevated today, and we're going to start writing too with the thoughts that are flooding our heads. So thank you so very much. I want to also thank our great team, Anna Carhart, who's our theater manager, Justin Tinker, our technical director, and Sabrina Sabalo, who's our box office manager and Zoom maven. Up on the screen there is listing some great upcoming events, also from the English department and our music department. So please come check them out. More details at njcu.edu/arts. And yeah, we welcome you to be part of our community at all times. So I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Nancy and Edie, and have a great day.